Welcome to the best of trending in education. This is Mike Palmer taking you back to the fall of 2018, a bit of a way back ride when we attended the National Association of Broadcasters event at the Javits Center here in New York City. We were joined by the host of the Science Versus podcast, Wendy Zukerman. If you hadn't heard of Wendy or you haven't heard her show, she's really remarkable, amazing to get her as part of this conversation that we had live in front of a live audience. You can even hear a live question at the end. I'm joined by Brandon Jones, who was my co-host in the early days of Trending in Ed. And we really just had a blast out there live with Wendy on the show floor of the Javits Center back in a very different time in 2018. Touched on some really interesting topics and themes that I think you'll enjoy. Interesting takes on the vaccine conversation pre-COVID and some wild and wacky takes from the world of science and how to be entertaining while still informing and maintaining your credibility. Topics that are still relevant to this day, as is the anti-science movement that we touched on as part of this conversation. Was interesting foreshadowing in light of what we've been through over the past few years. I would say check out what Wendy's doing at Gimlet. She's been doing some really fascinating fact-checking of folks like Joe Rogan and even becoming a bit of an advocate and an activist in service of good critical thinking, good science literacy. Definitely worth checking out. And with that, I hope you enjoy this conversation live from the floor of the Javits Center during NAB New York in the fall of 2018. Take it away with the best of trending in education. Welcome, everyone, to a very special edition of Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here, joined, as always, by my colleague, Brandon Jones. Brandon, yes. How are you?
I'm quite well. I'll tell you a little bit more about how I am and where I am in just a second,
Yeah.
But we have another guest we want to make sure
we
everybody...
have an amazing guest.
We do.
The bestest
the best guest.
Yes. So we have Wendy Zukerman.
Wow.
From Science Versus. Wendy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I've never been introduced via rhyme, the best guest.
We try. Yeah. Not only do we have Wendy with us, which makes this amazing, but we're also not in our typical audio booths. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So you will hear Wendy, hopefully, otherwise we've done a bad job of hosting, but you'll also hear probably like everybody else.
Yeah.
We are, there's some ambience here, some ambient noise, some folks standing here with us live. We are at the Javits Center here in New York City at the National Association of Broadcasters trade show.
Yes.
And we are coming live from the trade show floor. So listen, and hopefully those of you who are around can enjoy the show today. But listeners who are listening to this just through the learn holes,
yes,
you're missing out on this whole setting that's going on around here.
Correct.
It's old media, new media.
It's a veritable gumbo of media.
It sure is.
And we're really lucky to have somebody from Gimlet with us. So Wendy.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. What is this like? Where are we? Can you describe? Our listeners are hearing us right now. How would you describe what you're seeing?
I guess it's like a airport hangar meets industry, just hullabaloo.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
It's all of those things. Last time I was at NAB in New York, so at the Javits Center in New York, last time I was here 2 years ago, the NAB conference happened. And it was literally the day after the 2016 election. So we were walking around in the same facility, and there were literally still balloons in the rafters for what was supposed to be a celebratory acceptance speech.
Oh, wow.
And let me say, the mood here is much more positive. And we wanted to talk about the intersection between education and learning and podcasting. And as luck would have it, both of our shows are both educational and their podcast.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
Yeah.
Really. I mean,
can you talk a little bit about what your show is and how long you've been doing it and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I host a podcast called Science Versus, which is made by Gimlet Media.
Yeah.
But I was making it in Australia a couple of years ago, and it was never meant to be a full-time job, just a fun thing on the side. And the show is all about trying to take these ideas that people have in the community, like things that are in the zeitgeist, things they've always thought are true.
Zeitgeist alert.
We love that word. I try to say zeitgeisty almost every show.
It's really fun. I mean, it's hard to spell, but it's great to say.
It's like hullabaloo.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. And then we put all these ideas under like the scientific microscope, and we really try to inject fun, but take emotion out of these otherwise potentially emotional issues.
Yeah.
So last week we did an episode on gentrification, which lots of people, particularly in New York, have lots of feelings about. But we tried as hard as possible to just look at the data to say what exactly is going on.
Yeah.
But we also tackle funner, less heady issues like essential oils. A little bit less political, veganism and schmilks.
Schmilks. Brandon was kind enough to stop by Starbucks to pick up some caffeinated beverages.
I sure did. I stood in a 30-person line. That's what happens when you're at a trade show like this. And I timed the amount of time it took 5 people.
Yes.
And then figured out if I had enough time to stay in line. I just barely did.
Yeah.
But they say my names on them. So if you think you're drinking my beverage, it's because you are.
That looks like you.
It sure does.
Yeah.
How's the schmilk?
It's great, which for those, I guess, who haven't listened to the episode, is a word we coined, my amazing producer, Rose Ribbler, coined non-dairy related milk.
Because the dairy industry doesn't want soy milk, oat milk, rice milk to be called milk. They're trying to figure out what word you can use.
Well, even the FDA came forward, thank goodness, because they told us like you can't, like almonds don't lactate.
Right.
Thank God we have that from them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would
you never know.
No.
Yeah.
So but I mean, ultimately, we all call it almond milk. You put it on your cereal. But we thought it was funny to call it schmilk.
Oh, I love it. Schmilk. We were brainstorming the 2 ideas that we came up with. I don't think they're as good as schmilk, but we did say nut juice.
Ooh, nut juice.
Yeah, trouble, right? So stay away from nut juice. Then also, what was the other one? Oh, woke milk.
I feel like it's a misuse of the word woke, but it is true that we did find that all of these schmilks, nut juices are better for the environment, so they are not just a fad.
Right.
In that way, I guess you are more woke in some ways if you're drinking them.
Exactly. And then also the vegan show, you talked about dairy there too. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So with the vegan show, I mean, that was like I think we had a lot of like shocking moments when we were researching that, because there's a lot of ideas people have about whether you need to eat meat and drink milk to be healthy. And like all through my childhood, I was told like you need dairy for strong bones.
Right.
And from the best science we have, it does suggest that you need calcium for strong bones.
Right.
But whether you absolutely need milk, there are question marks, which I was surprised by, because according to the ads, there was no question marks in those ads growing up.
Right, because Got Milk was legendary, right?
Exactly. There was a question, but it was like, have you got milk?
There was a question mark in that Got Milk question.
Yeah.
But it wasn't around whether the science suggested you needed it for
Right. It was the way it was delivered, it was better have milk, exclamation point.
Right.
Yeah. So I see where you're going.
Yeah.
How do the shows that you do sort of come to be? Like, how do you select topics? Do you have a backlog of topics that you're working through now? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, we have a pitch process, and there is this backlog. It's kind of funny, like when I started this show in 2014, and just to like give you a sense of what was happening in 2014, our first show and the pilot was on the paleo diet. Like, remember, it feels like such a long time ago. Now we have the ketogenic diet and various iterations. But that was my first episode. And I remember when I was pitching this show to the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation at the time, like I really didn't think there was going to be, years of like a career ahead of me in this kind of fact-checking zeitgeisty stuff. I was like, once you get through, in that first season, we did like the gay gene and pornography, and like we hit the big hitters, and then like eventually in America, we got to like vaccines and climate change. And you're like, how many of these can there be?
Right.
But the truth is there are so many ideas that people have about so many topics, and they haven't done any research on them. It's just like this feeling of like, I think that's bad, or like, I think this is definitely good. And so there is this like never ending list. But to how we kind of refine what we decide to cover, since you could do this, ultimately forever, it seems like, is we really try and pick topics that either are really in the moment. So we've got a topic on CBD coming up. That's really kind of having a moment. Last season, we did the ketogenic diet.
What is CBD? CBD is cannabinoid, and then BD, right? After the
cannabidiol. It's ultimately like a chemical in cannabis. So like THC. They're like the like easy narrative is like THC is what makes you high.
Uh-huh.
CBD is a panacea.
Oh, that's delightful.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So you can put it in your coffee and like, pizzam, you
With
feel
your schmilk,
amazing.
a little CBD with your schmilk.
Exactly. So CBD has a much more interesting story, and there is some interesting science around it, but it's definitely having a moment. And so that was something that we did really want to find more information on. So I think that's basically how we pick it. Like, what's super interesting, what has an interesting story behind it, and what's going to be counterintuitive. So one topic that we've kind of, as an example of something that we haven't tackled yet, is like the flu shot, because I guess, what would you guys think an episode on the flu shot would be? Like, do you think it's effective?
Do I think the flu shot is effective, or what do I think a flu shot episode should be about, and would that be effective? I'll answer the second one.
The first one.
Yeah, the first one. Well, I get a flu shot every year now. So I have a 4-year-old daughter. We talk about her on the show every now and then.
Shout out to Penny.
Shout out to Penny if you're listening. Why are you listening to a podcast? You're 4. And it was like indoctrinated. They put the doc indoctrinated in me that as a new parent, you must get a flu shot. Otherwise, you're exposing your child to undue risk. I know you've got the vaccination, anti-vax movement show as well, but I bought it. And so now I just do it. It happens for free on a day in my office. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll get the flu shot. I guess that would be, for me, the central argument for a show is the science behind it good? Is it helpful in the micro sense for individual patients? Is it good for us as a society? Like, are we doing more net good or more net harm? I think those are interesting topics to tackle.
Yeah. Yeah. So the reason we haven't tackled it yet is that the answer is probably.
Yeah.
So the answer is like, which I think most people know, but we may end up covering it, is that like, it's not 100%. So you can get the flu shot.
Right.
Everyone's nodding, right? Everyone already knows this. Like, it's
Right.
not 100%.
Yeah.
It's still pretty good. It protects you from a couple of strains, maybe more than a couple.
So do you prefer shows where the answer is definitively yes or definitively no in the end? Or does that make for a better show typically when there is something dispositive you can get to?
I think there has to be something that like upends your current beliefs. So if people have very strong beliefs about something and we can say there's no science there, or the science hasn't come, then that's interesting.
Those are the good ones. Those are the good ones.
Right?
Yeah.
Where you're
Yeah.
like, where people are like, I definitely know this. And you're like, well, science doesn't. So how do you? That's interesting. If people have like very strong beliefs and then we can say the science is against you, that's interesting. If people have like beliefs and all we can say is the science is then those are the episodes that are kind of like, well, I didn't really think anything of this, and turns out neither does science. So
We tried this, by the way, just a quick interjection. We tried this with learning styles. So there is a belief that there are learning styles that people are visual learners or auditory learners, etc. The literature, the science behind suggests that's not true. But we tried that, and our listeners were like, thank you, but I still don't believe it. Like,
oh yeah.
so it made me think of it when you said that people have strong beliefs. Sometimes even when presented with the science behind, that doesn't always make a believer into a different believer.
No, I mean, if only, right? I mean, the world would
If
be a
only,
very
yeah.
different place if that wasn't the case. No, I mean, I don't have delusions of grandeur that when people listen to our show, they're like, what? We need to start acting on climate change. But I do hope that people listen and then they have the tools to, when they're in a discussion with their family or friends, to be like, well, I just listened to a show about this and this is what the science says. And
Yeah.
hopefully little by little you like etch away. We have had, I think one of the episodes that we get the most emails about people saying, I actually changed my mind, thank you, was our attachment parenting episode. And I don't know what it was about that episode or that topic. Perhaps it was because we had a mum who practiced attachment parenting. And then when we were like, you know what, there's like no research here. The guy who created this is kind of a shyster. She really like listened and took it on and was like, oh, wow. She didn't like regret the way that she had started, but she was really putting her whole life into this kid. And like attachment parenting is effectively like you can't have a job and be a full-on attachment parent. So you're really like sacrificing a lot, which might be worth it if the science was like, this baby will be happier. But if there's no science there, you're just doing this huge sacrifice for not much benefit. And she really listened. And I think lots of people like sent that around to their friends who they saw crumbling under the pressures of attachment parenting and were like, just have a listen. Like just have a listen. And the response was amazing. People being like, thank you so much. Like, I really did feel like, because around the schoolyard, they were like, well, you've got to, that baby's not attached to you right now, like all this pressure. But to be able to be like, there's no science there. Like, I don't have to succumb to this. So sometimes
Yeah, that's
science
great. I
helps.
think one changed life is a success.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've run into a lot is frequently it's complicated, right? There's not a definitive. So full disclosure, I've been binging on Science Versus for the last 2 days.
We had a little like a thought experiment. Could I catch up to you?
Yes,
I started later and I was listening at 1x.
yes,
And you started earlier and listening at 2x.
yes,
So it's unlikely that I was going to catch up to you.
yes.
And I think Science Versus, I didn't.
Right. But I started with season 1 when you were in Australia.
A baby.
Yeah. And you were like scoring like science for one of them was even Science Versus Science.
Yeah.
And it was like
It's pretty meta.
and there was scoring and it was
pretty
always
proud
like
of myself.
it was like a half versus a half. Or it was like 1 versus 0. And I started to get confused. And I realized once you moved on to Gimlet, like you maybe dialed back on that scoring, but isn't it partly because it's just complicated? We've talked about that frequently. You start doing research, you realize the hot take is actually maybe a little more nuanced, and you actually need to dig in and understand. Particularly, you're sort of providing proof points for both sides of an argument, for example.
Exactly. So I think the idea in season 1 was very much like science versus a topic. So like the paleo diet, but it was a completely like false fight because like science always won. So even if the paleo diet won, science wins as well.
Right.
So it like completely didn't work. And then even when like the topic itself had some truth to it, then we had to start doing like 0.5 to 1.5. Yeah. And
Yeah.
like the fractions just got
When you got to
ridiculous.
Gimlet, they're like, just no more with the points. No more with the half points, the hay points. If you're coming to Gimlet, we're going to drop this whole point thing. That was part of the deal?
It was, there were lots of discussions. There was no like, you have to pass this, but it was very quickly like, look, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't really.
Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about what Gimlet is and what it's like to produce those shows, and particularly the sound? You guys do amazing stuff with sound and amazing stuff with your credits because you're a science show. So can you talk about what it's like to work? Who is Gimlet? What it's like to work with them, and what goes into your shows?
Yeah, absolutely. So Gimlet Media is a podcast company, and it was started up by Alex Bloomberg, who used to work for This American Life and Planet Money. And he had this vision to create this, like, ultimately a home for really well-crafted podcasts where people had like time and resources to make beautiful audio. And so shows that we make that people might know are Reply All, Startup was the first one,
Right.
Crime Town, Heavyweight. So I think there's this slate of like 10 shows, maybe more. And so at Gimlet, I'm given so many resources that I didn't have when I was in Australia, because it was very much podcasting was like a cottage industry then.
Right.
So at Gimlet, I have like a whole team, and I have a senior producer, amazing Caitlin Sorey. I have like two producers, an intern, and I have a sound engineer
Oh,
who's
yeah.
that beautiful sound that you're hearing.
Oh, my
who
God.
Scores her own, like she makes music for particular episodes, Emma Munger.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely astonishing, and you can hear the difference. Like,
Yeah.
she's like, she hates fading down like music. She's like, that's, we've got to do this like beautiful panache resolve that like with these effects that I have no idea, and it sounds amazing. So it's the editing process at Gimlet is astounding. So we go through about 3 edits, and then we build the actual episode, and then people listen, put
Right.
in notes, and then we have an independent fact checker, and then we have like someone on the team who hasn't worked on it, then they become a fact checker
Sure.
as well.
Yeah.
So it's this like huge, very detailed process before it goes out into the world.
Pretty similar to how we
basically how we
operate.
work.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
I've got such sound envy from
Oh, my
your
God.
show, like Science Versus, which, by the way, we should keep saying because
Yes.
people need to know
Sure.
where Wendy's from. There are all these like cool effects that I thought those from listening to my own show. I thought those were impossible. Like you couldn't do those in 2018. I'm ready. I'm ready for some more sounds.
That
You could drop
trombone,
in.
I feel like that could.
That's my favorite trombone.
Yeah. But the cool thing, though, from a learning perspective, it does seem like the sound actually helps tie to a previous association. Granted, I've been binging. It was at 2x. Stuff's flying by fast. You talk about a baby when the anti-vaxxing show, I'll hear like a little baby cry, and like it actually adds depth to my experience because it's tying to like emotional associations and like prior memories and things like that. It almost reminds me of memes, like a visual meme. The pushback on our learning style show was so many people are just watching content right now as opposed to listening to it or reading it. They expect to see GIFs, they expect to see visuals. But I feel like you guys do a nice job of almost a corollary to that with your audio production.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's like we have fun with the sounds, but they do have a purpose. We try to use jokes and use silly sounds and then use emotional sounds. But the driving force is always getting the science right.
Right.
So if we have a character that has this emotional story, it's supposed to help you remember and understand the science. But the sounds, they are important. So when sometimes we put like a silly sound, it's there to like wake you up. Like
Right.
it's there if we've just told you like a lot of heavy research, we may do a silly sound effect that some people are like, what was that? Like, what was that? But it's there to be like, oh, wait, I'm listening. This
Yeah.
is something. Did I even miss something? I better go back. It's there for a purpose. And like the scoring is there to tell you like, this is one beat.
Right.
Now we're going to switch beats. We're going to switch the scoring. So it has like its own character.
Yeah.
And particularly with audio, as you say, obviously we don't have the visuals to be like, we're going into a different scene now. We're going into a different scene now. So
Right.
the scoring has to play that role.
And then I know fact checking and crediting your sources is also something that you seem very passionate about. When you listen to the end of the show, that the last 2 minutes or so are citing a running list of doctors and professors and experts. We're at a media conference. Everyone's talking about fake news and crisis of truth. You guys almost seem like a force for good. Can you talk about like the importance of fact checking and peer review? Even when you did science versus science, you were sort of saying, in some ways, science eats itself, and that's okay.
I should have that as like a post-it note, like force for good
Yeah.
on those
Right.
on those bad days.
Yeah.
Michael says,
Well, it's a
force
really
for good.
affirming experience for you.
Yeah.
No, this is great. Fact checking is super, super important to us. So it's like, it's the entire brand of the show is that we have to get the facts right. I've always said, if to my team, not to the world, like if the show is a little bit boring at times, that's more important. That's more important that it's boring and we get the facts right. So if it means we have to like take people on a bit of a journey about what the study has done,
Right.
and by journey, I mean, if it's going to be tough and complicated, if we get the science right, we can all go to sleep. That's fine. It has been hard though, because you read to get a show that is a half an hour, that is palpable and listenable and interesting
Yeah.
and correct, you actually have to do so much more research than if you were going to do a 2-hour journey into a topic where you
Right.
can go into like every single avenue, even if you're like
Like a Nova special or something.
exactly,
Right?
yeah. Or even to actually like research, you do this like pile of research and you're like, okay, the consensus is all building around this one particular idea. That's the idea this episode has to be about. We don't need to mention all these like the root system or
Right.
the everything else. If all the scientists are like heading towards this direction, that's what we focus on. But you need to do a ton of research to know where that consensus is building. And, particularly in the early seasons of the show and in America, and like people didn't really know who I was. And obviously many people don't know who I am now. But before it was really like, wait, who is this? She's working for Gimlet and she's already telling me how to parent. Like, what is this woman? Like at least in Australia, I kind of like, people knew that I was like good at reporting science. Like but here it was just like, who is this and where is she getting her research from and what's going on? And you can't see the citations in audio. And we have
Right.
thought about like, could we do like an audio cue every time we're like citing a study, even if we're not?
Yeah.
That's annoying.
Yeah.
That's just like bragging rights almost. Like it's like you either trust us or you don't. But I think this season we've gotten better. So last season we actually started releasing transcripts of our script so people could see all the citations, and that's helped with people being like, but what about this? Or like, I work in a lab and you didn't mention my research.
Right.
That's a common one we get. And then we can just be like, we didn't mention yours, but this is all the research that
Yeah.
we read. And then this season, we're even telling people how many citations are in each
Yes.
episode just at the end, so that then they get an even better sense of like, we really have done our homework.
No, I
guys.
know.
This is what we think. But it takes a level of trust, and we do love that our audience is like, but what about this and what
Right.
about that? And sometimes they do say things that we haven't thought about, but often we have.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about the level to which people are questioning what is true these days and the role that science can play. Do you feel like you are representing science? It's a bold position to be like science versus, and you're on the side of science. I appreciate that, because like that's a strong take. And like for us, I mean, we're trending in education, but we're not like, we are education. You know what I mean? So like,
It's true. It's true. And it does mean there's this like very big expectation on the show that there's no loosey-goosey talk. I mean, you listen to some extremely popular podcasts where it's like an interview show, something like Joe Rogan, where he's just like having a chat with someone and maybe even a scientist, and the amount of stuff that I'm hearing that I'm like, what? Like, what? How are you possibly saying that? Like, how do you, like, where's your citations? Like, I want receipts. Like, no way he's getting as many, like, tweets as we do about, like, but what about that? But what about that? Because everyone's just like, it's just Joe. He's just having a chat. It's called Joe Rogan. It's not called, like, this is the ultimate truth. And there's, like, an expectation that he set there, whereas we've set this expectation that's like, we are science.
Well, and I'd also say you're science, but you're also entertaining. People tend to think of these things as, like, mutually exclusive. Either you're entertaining, or you're funny, or you're engaging, or you're teaching me about science. And I think you're demonstrating that you can actually do both those things at the same time. And you almost have to, right? Because otherwise you're gonna lose the learner who's gonna say, well, there's a great show just came out on Netflix. I may stop learning right now, and instead I'm going to hop over there and watch TV, and I'm kind of learning anyway, right?
Yeah, that's obviously what we're trying to do with education as well, is that education, like science, oftentimes it's presented in a way that's pretty dry and pretty dense. And I think the idea of bringing, we call it edutainment, and there's a sci-tainment.
Sci-tainment.
All right. That's a working title.
We can workshop it. We'll workshop it.
That conceit of it either has to be, entertaining, or it has to be sort of fact-based. I think that conceit is a false construct.
It's funny because we do fight against this idea of, like, what is the voice of authority, particularly at the beginning, but even now, because we are trying to be funny, and, like, there's this, like, very nerdy tagline. It's like, we take science seriously, but not ourselves. Is, like, the line. But we do get emails about and tweets and reviews of the show that are like, there's not enough science in this show. Like, there's not enough. And ultimately, I think what's happening is it's because the science is, like, said in an entertaining way, and because it's said with a female voice.
Right.
A female, like, young-ish voice. And so it's like, sometimes people, like, just don't hear the fact that the entire show is science. Like, we might have, like, 3 minutes of someone up the top, like, telling a personal story.
Right.
But then it's just, like, back-to-back research.
Yeah.
And I feel like, because it's not said with this, like, official, like, BBC-esque voice of authority. It's not like an old man talking. It's like that people don't hear it. And we have even had shows where we will have a female scientist on, also called a scientist.
Right. Yeah.
And people are like, you didn't even address this issue. And I was like, yeah, we did. Like, this researcher spoke about it for like 10 minutes.
Right.
Did you not hear that she was a researcher?
Yeah.
That is something you come up against when you're trying to make science fun.
Right.
It's like the expectations you're setting.
I know you're normally on a show that has really religious fact-checking, but today we were thinking about just floating some of the ideas that we've talked about on shows just to get your hot takes.
Just lightning round?
Here's a lightning round.
All right.
So you can
All right.
just give us your read on some of these topics. So the first one that we wanted to talk about was binge learning. Even heading into this show, Brandon and I both had to binge on science versus just to get as much information into our brains as possible so that hopefully we could keep up with you today. So far, so good, I hope. But a lot of the research says that spaced repetition is better. You're better off not binging or cramming right before a test. Instead, it's better to kind of do some spaced repetition. So had I had more time, I should have listened to a few episodes. I've like literally listened to like 20 episodes in the last 36 hours. So like,
I can see that, like,
oh my God,
the flicker
it's like
in your
the amount of
eye.
science in my brains right now is crazy.
That's
but,
just how he looks.
It's true. Get to know me. But
are we asking Wendy if does she have?
Do you have any
she's
kind of
a science person,
do you have
right?
any take on binge learning or cramming? Or do you want to quiz us on shows?
Yeah, okay, let's do this as a test, because
Sure.
I haven't done any research on it, so I wouldn't want to make any claims.
That's like our wheelhouse.
Right?
Yeah.
That's like, okay, so you said you listened to a whole bunch of episodes.
Yeah.
Okay, so serial killers.
Yes.
What do you now know about serial killers?
Oh my God. Okay, so serial killers, there's a sexual thing. I remember you talked about that, where there is a sexual part. Maybe that's the main thing.
I feel like that's going to be the answer to all of your.
Well, can you prompt me? I feel like with the prompt, I'll get it.
I like want to make fun of you for that being your response, but literally that was my takeaway as well. Like, I was much more excited to research to get into the topic of serial killers until I started researching it. And then
Yeah.
I was like, oh, they're all just like,
Yeah.
like,
They're just weird.
like there's
Yeah,
like very little fun here.
creepy stuff.
They're just like, it's like there's a lot of like sex stuff. There's a lot of like female violence. Like it actually just like, the more I researched, I was like, I actually don't want to do this. Yeah. So, okay. So let's move away from that.
Yeah.
Essential oils.
I don't think I did essential oils, but I did do vegan.
Okay.
So the vegans one I thought was like dairy, not really helpful. And then meats.
That's only rated 2 times.
Meats and those things are generally better because you get the B12. And so vegans need some supplements, but otherwise it's generally it's better for the environment. And with some supplements, it's probably as healthy, if not maybe a little healthier. Although there was some science that said the meats and the proteins from hunting, I think it was like 2 million years, we've been eating meat. So we started herbivorous and now we're omnivorous because we started with the meats. So I did better on that one, right?
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
We can end the test section
Yes.
of the podcast here.
Yeah.
Talk about a couple things on the intersection of podcasting or the intersection of media and education. So I have a hot take on this, which is that's another conceit that I think is a bit of a construct that if you have a broad enough definition of media, I think you can fit actually education into media. And I wonder if you have a thought on sort of how you see the role of media or your role as a podcaster intersecting with education. How do those two things, are they the same thing? Are they different things? Does one inform the other? Thoughts on that?
I mean, I think media can absolutely be educational for sure. I mean, particularly today, like the line between media, education, fake news, like it's all just like mumbling together in this like weird, teenage hormonal brew that I can't wait until like the internet like reaches adulthood and we like sort it all out. I absolutely see our show as being like educational in that people are learning things and they're hopefully like learning how to think about science. Like I think if they take anything away, even if they don't like agree with the topic or they're not convinced by the science, like at least I think there's this big anti-science push right now, which is obviously like very upsetting and very disturbing. But hopefully our show and others that are doing similar work go a little part of the way of just being like, look, science isn't perfect. It doesn't have all the answers, but it's the best we've got. And this is how you can yourself like analyze a study. Like if a news report comes out that says, whatever, CBD cures autism, like you can look at that and you can start being like, okay, was it done in an animal study? It was done in humans. How many humans were in it? How long did this study go for? Who was it funded by? Like there are tools in the toolbox that you can do your own critical thinking without just like saying these like jingoisms like, oh, science, that's just, funded by whatever. Like there's just these like jingoisms and it's like, well, who do you think is funding all this like natural like,
right.
like you think that's just like coming out, well, so I think hopefully it gives people their own tool.
I am going to try to pitch that education is media in as much as it's delivered through a medium. And so the message matters.
If you create a broad enough definition, you can shove anything in there.
Sometimes we think about the medium for media as being, really important for media and less so for education. But, despite our debunking of the myth of learning styles, the way in which you deliver it is really important, I think. And so if there are people who are, creators of educational content, one of the things that we've tried to encourage them to think about is be really purposeful in that. And so I think that the choice of, audio as the medium that we all work in and, how you support that with transcript or show notes, things like that. I think all of that is relevant for thinking about educational content as well.
We did do a recent show around memory palaces, how you can train your memory by using imagery and physical locations. It's an ancient...
Yeah, so was that true? Is that true?
It was true based on us. Like, you guys may need to do further research, but there are a lot of like mental athletes who can memorize a ton of stuff because our brains are designed to remember physical spaces and then also really vivid imagery. And I do think you guys do that maybe naturally, but I think like it works when you can make a very specific visual image, or if you can make something that's a little bit funny or bawdy or something that makes it salient, it actually sticks in the learner's memory better. Like even Moonwalking with Einstein, the name of the book that we were referencing, that was one of the things that Josh Furr was using. That was one of his mnemonics. There's good science about mnemonics. It's a good idea maybe for a show for you guys. We have a ton of ideas on that front, just around stuff that we've done some preliminary research in, but it's almost like we should be serving that up to dive into.
That is something that our editors, like Alex Bloomberg and Caitlin Kenny, they do tell us and have told, like, particularly when I started it at Gimlet, and I was like, let's just put all the data in the podcast. And they were like, the way that they have been taught. And again, I don't know about the science. This is just like something that we're kind of learning on the fly, completely anecdotal. But what we have been told is that, like, when you tell something through a story,
Yes.
it does help people remember. And when you try and create an image around it,
Yeah.
people remember it better.
Right.
And so I think what you do see in, like, the best podcasts, or the podcasts when people are like, oh, what have you listened to recently? Often I think people will, like, recount a story that they actually visualized in
Right.
their head. Like, there was one from This American Life recently about, like, a bunch of bird feathers that got stolen, and, like, I remember that as if I saw it on television,
Right.
because it was so visual in the way they described it. And, like, that is something I don't think people perhaps realize when they're listening to podcasts, that they're imagining it, and that's what's helping them to remember it. Whereas if you just give them, like, fact after fact, just like
Right.
disembodied facts, it's hard to, like, put it somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're getting close to time, but one of the questions that we normally ask our guests is, what trends are you tracking? What are you seeing emerging in the world in 2018 that you think might be relevant to learning or to media or to science? Is there anything new that's got your attention?
Any trend? Can I have like a hopeful, optimistic
Please.
trend?
Yeah.
Like, if I just, like, say it, eventually
Yes.
it may happen.
Yes.
I feel like the anti-science trend is going to stop soon. It's going to
I
slow
like that.
down.
Yes.
I feel like it has been perpetuated by various places. And I feel like eventually people are going to realize, like, actually, they just want, whether they're looking for something that's going to help them live their life better, or for the environment to improve, or whatever, ultimately people do just want to know the truth. And eventually I feel like that things are going to turn, and they're going to realize that, like, science, while not perfect, is our best way of getting there. And so this, like, anti-science message will eventually burn out. Fingers crossed.
I hope so. You asked for questions. We actually do have a question. This isn't like a theoretical thing. I think there's actually, like, a human with the question. Come walk over here. Your name is
Yeah.
Brian, because you're wearing a name tag.
Yes.
Brian, welcome. Welcome to the show. This is Brian.
Excellent.
All right. Hi, guys. I produce a podcast called Base Pairs. So it's a podcast about genetics. So it's kind
Great
of up
name.
your alley there. Yeah. And the infotainment question, you
Yeah.
were talking about how, it might be science entertainment versus just entertaining and or educating. Where do you draw the line normally, Wendy? And this goes for you guys too. Like, you can go down a really deep rabbit hole trying to educate your viewer about things. So is there a place where you normally draw the line, like a grade level maybe?
Good question.
Me?
Thank you.
The line is, what's the point of the show? So I think, like, some daily shows, like John Oliver, is, like, effectively doing edutainment, kind of. But the point of that show is to make you laugh. So they use the facts around them to make you laugh. And the purpose is to make you laugh. It's not to, some people think it's to entertain you, but it's really just to show how silly life is and how silly the facts are, so that you laugh. Whereas a show like mine and a show like this one, the point is to make you learn. And if you laugh on the side, or, like, the laughter is going to be, like, secondary. That is, like, this, like, weaselly line in the sand for me.
What we're trying to do, and I think that what, we talked about the sounds in your show, et cetera, is actually to make it more engaging, so that there are stronger hooks, so that you remember it more. So if the question is, are you trying to get someone to laugh versus are you trying to get them to learn? I think that's the wrong question. I think that a lot of the entertainment that you build into the show, in this case, and in your case as a podcast host, should be in furtherance of getting people to learn what you're trying to tell them. That's maybe an imperfect answer too. That's why we're taking the tack that we're taking, is actually to make the education happen more through providing a more engaging vehicle.
I'll close with the perfect answer.
The baby bear.
I try. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It never made sense, by the way, because he should want the smallest porridge. But anyway.
Right. Yeah, that was
Man.
big stuff. But basically, like, storytelling and narrative are something we've evolved to do. So I think anything that sort of helps people remember by using good storytelling or narrative is actually a better way to teach. And then if you have good learning objectives and the intentionality that Brandon was talking about and Wendy was talking about, like, we're trying to educate people about a specific thing, then that's your learning objective. And you should be I would argue you should be experimental about your tactics. Like, don't limit yourself. Like, don't accept the self-limiting belief that science is boring. It's not. Bad science is boring and bad education is boring. But good education, some of my best experiences growing up were teachers who were cool, and we're kind of trying to translate that into new media. I wouldn't worry as much about it, honestly, especially if you know what your purpose is, which is to teach genetics. That seems like a good purpose. So take some swings. Well, Wendy Zukerman, thanks very much for joining us here. Thanks to our audience. We have a live audience. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for the question. Brandon, thanks as always.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
For our listeners, definitely have a listen to Science Versus with Wendy Zukerman. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And that'll bring this episode of the Best of Trending in Education to its conclusion. It was fantastic to start this conversation with Wendy. She's continued to do amazing work at Science Versus. Check out what she's doing. Hopefully you're enjoying what you're hearing as we gear up for our 500th episode of Trending in Ed in the coming weeks. We have new shows coming on the horizon, and we'll still take these opportunities to showcase and highlight some of our most amazing conversations over the years. It's been fantastic to have such an incredible ride and to have listeners like you along with us for all of it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.